Hi, everybody. How are you? This is my first visit to Little Rock, so thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you, and I'm really excited, too, that we're going to have time for questions and an answer session. So be thinking about the questions that you have, because if you don't actually have any questions for me, there's time allotted, which means I'm going to call on you in random order. So if you don't want me to call on you, because that's how I roll, make sure you've got questions ready to go. So we're going to spend the next 30 minutes. I've got some prepared remarks for you, but I thought it would be really helpful to do a quick poll, because I think if we get a visual, we'll sort of see where everybody's coming from and make sure we're all on the same page. So if y'all don't mind, just by show of hands, and we're not going to self-identify our companies or our schools or our organizations. So think about a friend, a loved one, a colleague that's worked at another organization or company or attending a school, and their company or organization has been breached in the last 12 to 18 months. If you know of somebody who's at a company or organization that's been breached in the last 12 to 18 months, raise your hand. Okay, now everybody take a look around the room. Okay. Now, thank you very much. So the second question I have is, think about yourself personally. Has a place that you've done business with or attended school or a place that you work, has it been breached? Have you gotten a letter that says you're now entitled to, woohoo, 1 year of free credit reporting because your data was breached, your credit card, your debit card, or your information? If that's the case in the last 12 to 18 months, please raise your hand. Great, okay, so not great. I mean, that's a big proportion of the room, but thank you. So now my third question is there anybody in the room that did not raise their hand for question 1 or 2? Are you living off the grid? So my point in bringing that up is we're not thinking the right way about data. And if we don't think the right way about data, how can we have privacy? So 2 things I want everybody to walk away from here today, 2 terms. The first is hackable, and the second is segment. Okay, so those are your 2 sort of action items, homework words. I'm going to make sure you remember them. And remember, if you don't ask me questions, I'll be asking you questions in a little while. All right, so hackable, and then the second one is, sorry, I don't know why this is buzzing away. I'm going to just put it right there. So hackable and then segment. On hackable, what I want you to walk away with is all technology is hackable. Okay, so that's the first one. And then the second one is segment. And I'm going to have an action item for anybody in the business community, in the nonprofit community, anybody who's thinking about running for office, and then I'm going to have actions for you as consumers. But first, what I want to do is tell you a story about Cami. Now, I feel like I'm like hidden behind this. I'm going to try this. Can you guys still hear me? Okay, great. So the first story I want to tell you about is Cami, and I'm allowed to tell you this story. I have her permission. It's actually in my book. Cami had her life flash before her eyes one day. Now, not literally flash before her eyes, but she walked into a pretty nasty divorce proceeding. Her husband was suing for custody of her kids. And she walked into the court proceeding to see tables piled with binders. And she asked what the binders were, and her husband said to her, "Those are all your posts online for the last 3 years." She was a bit nauseated to see her last 3 years of her online activities in stacks and stacks of binders on tables. Now, question, is it legal? I don't know. Is that an invasion of privacy? I'm not positive. It's kind of gray. But I'm happy to report that after making the court read through all of the binders, they found nothing on Cami. Cami lives a really good and virtuous life, both online and offline. She has shared custody of her kids. Now, full disclosure, Cami is a mommy blogger, so she has a very active presence online. And even though she knew in her heart she's done nothing wrong online, Seeing her life that way made her sick to her stomach. She said she actually couldn't hear her lawyer talking to her. Just the sort of that ringing in her ears of, oh my gosh, and then her head telling her, I've done nothing wrong, but maybe, I don't know, gosh, that's a lot. I mean, maybe I did something wrong. What if they find something and I don't get custody of my kids? So that's a personal story. Now, a business story. So this is a story of just because you can doesn't mean you should. So in the UK, people were, doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're throwing away garbage. They're also recycling. I think a lot of people in here say recycling is a good thing to do, right? It's good for the environment. You can reuse things. It's the right thing to do. They were a little shocked to learn that most people, when you have your cell phone on you, a lot of you have your Wi-Fi turned on. You're always looking for a way to save on your data plan. Not many people have unlimited data plans anymore, so you have that Wi-Fi turned on and you're connecting to Wi-Fi, trusted Wi-Fi, wherever you go. Well, a lot of people were surprised to learn that these trash cans, as you're throwing your recycles in, are actually having Wi-Fi hotspots, so you connect to it, and then at that point, it grabs your device ID. Now, your device ID is like a social security number. It actually is unique to that device. It tells the person collecting it if it's a Samsung or an iPhone, what operating system. That device ID, when matched with other databases, traces it back to you, unless you buy your phones under an alternate persona, which if you do, then we have a whole nother issue to talk about, right? So just because you can doesn't mean you should. So we've got this challenge around privacy. And when you think about privacy, a lot of people say, well, when you look at what celebrities do and all the things they post online, why should they expect a right to privacy? But I think we would all agree that their children didn't choose to be celebrities. Do they have a right to privacy? And just because they posted things online, if they have a part of their life they never posted online, but somebody hacks in and posts it for them, is that right? So we're in this gray space right now where our laws have not kept up with the technology. You even look at net neutrality. Regardless of where you stand on that issue, they went to a 1934 law to start establishing net neutrality for the internet. I mean, really? What does 1934 have to do with today's internet? I think our generation in 1934 would have looked at Facebook and said, what? And why? So we have a real challenge, and it's time for an open debate. It's time for a healthy discussion with you in the room as a consumer and as an individual, with you as leaders in your community, whether you're in politics, whether you're a leader in schools, whether you're teaching, business, or attending school. It's time to have that dialogue around what is privacy and what are the right norms. So the next thing I want to talk to you a little bit about is thinking about this differently. So just sort of call out. Let's talk about the breaches that occurred in the last 12 to 14 months. Anybody have a company name come to mind? Just call out. Target, Home Depot, Microsoft, Anthem, Yahoo, Sony. Anybody else have a few more they want to call out? I mean, that was a lot just off the top of your head, and nobody even went to their smartphone to look it up. Nobody typed into Google, last 14 months searches, right? It was all top of mind, all top of mind. So let's go back. I said there were two words I wanted you to walk away with that are sort of your homework assignment. Let's walk back to hackable. All technology is hackable. I don't care if it came out of DARPA. I don't care if Google creates it, if you create it, best and the brightest. What makes technology updatable makes it vulnerable. So it's all hackable. So as leaders in your community, that needs to be the core principle that you start with when you design something. So you need to ask yourself, when I put this into play, when I collect someone's data, it's going to get hacked into, and they're going to steal the data, because data is valuable. It can be used for any variety of different cybercrimes around the world. And so if you know that in the design, you're going to think differently about data. So if you're a leader in the community and you're thinking about all things are hackable in your design, let's now talk about the data you collect. Now, the data that you're collecting can be used for so much good. Big data is going to help us cure today's terminal diseases and turn them into something maybe as annoying as the common colds, but not something we die from. Big data helps us manage the weather and helped my plane get here on time so I could be here with you today in spite of the fog in Charlotte canceling flights around me. Big data worked in my favor today to be here. Big data can also help us fight fraudsters. So if we do a better job in the business community and say, I know that all technology is hackable and I must protect this data. Not the Dilbert jokes that are being sent around. They don't deserve the same kind of protections. Although Dilbert jokes are quite funny, aren't they? I mean, they're good for a laugh. But they don't deserve the same protection as your financial information, as your social security number, as your health information, right? I think we can all agree to that. So if you're thinking about that from the design and you're collecting that type of data, you can use big data and behavioral-based analytics to look at that specific information. So as it relates to health information, who's accessing this? How often do they do it? Now you get a baseline. Now if you see traffic talking to that data out of the norm of that baseline, you know you've got a problem. And so it could maybe explain a couple different things. Let's take Target, for example, since somebody shouted out Target. Does anybody remember how the cyber criminals got in? Vendor. And the vendor, little vendor, off the radar in Pittsburgh, heating and chilling vendor. Okay, do you think that vendor, October before the holiday season, thought, I'm going to be the reason why Target gets taken down? No way. Do you think Target thought, with their sophisticated security team and the technology and all of the money they invested, that they were going to get taken down? But what was stolen as part of that breach? Does anybody remember? It wasn't just credit cards and debit cards. What else did they take? Email addresses and your home addresses. Now, what's your email address tied to? Lots. I love that. That's an awesome answer. That's a very honest answer. Your email address is tied to lots. Your bank account, your health care, your kids' school, your social media. So when you think about privacy, we have to think differently about this data we're collecting, why we're collecting it, and how are we protecting it, and who is allowed to access it. So big data can actually help us fight the bad guys. So it's our philosophy that had big data been in effect in between that heating and chilling vendor and Target, you would have a baseline over time of that traffic between those two companies, right? And so when all of a sudden that traffic spiked up, if they had been leveraging big data and behavioral-based analytics, they would have said, oh my gosh, there's a couple logical scenarios here. The first could be someone's trying to do testing and diagnostics between the two of us. Two, there might be some type of an electrical outage or some type of a heating and chilling problem right now. Or three, oh my gosh, the account credentials have been compromised and cyber criminals are running like crazy to deposit black malware POS on the point of sale systems just in time for the holidays, right? So when you think about privacy, a lot of times we get caught up in, well, what is the government collecting and what is the government accessing? And I welcome a Q&A and a dialogue on that. We think about marketing and we think about companies and what are they doing with the data. But I'm trying to take a step backwards here and ask the question, why are we collecting it to begin with? And how do we think differently about how we protect that data? So again, if you're a leader in the community, why are we collecting the data? How are we segmenting it? Knowing that all technology is hackable, if somebody hacks in, do you want all the crown jewels in one treasure chest so you make it easy for them? Or have you thought about actually segmenting the data and treating it and putting it in different parts within the castle? So you have to make them work for it. You got to make them run around. And maybe you'll catch them before they run off with all the jewels. So segmentation of that data is so important. then you often see that companies sort of lose track of the data. So I will not name the company, but there was a wealth management company. And do any of you know wealth managers or any wealth managers in the room? Yeah, they have a tough job. On average, wealth managers might have 250 to 300 clients that you're supposed to make feel personal and special. There's only 365 days in a year. You need to use big data to help you with that. This one wealth management group, they were actually using big data to create profiles on who sort of buys and sells based on what's going on in the news. And they also had nicknames for their clients as well, which we won't get into. But they were nicknames that helped them sort of remember who was who. Now, just like if you think about in the old days, I take my kids to the Smithsonian each summer in DC. It's really great, sort of this walk down history lane, and then they say, is this what it was like when you were a little girl? And you have that great conversation like, I wasn't alive yet, okay. But one of the things that I love, and it's something that I've talked to my kids about, is think about the old days of file cabinets. So for those of you who are too young to remember what those were, they were usually metal, usually not very attractive, and you stored lots of files in them, and you had a filing system, alphabetical order or topic order or whatever it was. But you had a shredding strategy, right? Because if you kept too many folders around, it would take over where people were supposed to sit. But because memory is so inexpensive and accessing it is so inexpensive, and a lot of the data is in the cloud, nobody's thinking about this digital shredding strategy. This is one of the greatest risks to our overall privacy. The ability to collect and store data and shove it up like it's in grandma's attic, it's a treasure, it might be a treasure later, I don't know what to do with it right now, so just put it in the attic. And that's what we're doing. We're putting the data in the databases, the data in the cloud, and we don't know if we're ever gonna need it, but gosh, golly, we're gonna keep it just in case we do. And so this wealth management organization, like all companies do, had a reorganization, and people moved around, but the data stayed. And hackers got in and took the data. And what they decided to do was they thought, this seems kind of valuable to me, I'm going to try and sell it. So they tried to sell it. How do you think the company found out that their customers with their nicknames and their buying and selling profiles were on the internet? Do you think their security tools told them? Somebody tried to sell it to one of their competitors, and the competitor said, this isn't right, and they told the company. Now, that could have been your data, but because it wasn't the exact financial data, disclosure laws don't say they have to tell you, because it wasn't account numbers, it wasn't specifics, it was psychological profiles and nicknames. But still, that's not really a great place to be with your customers. But again, going back to privacy, this concept of privacy is unique and different to each one of us as individuals. Cami, the mommy blogger that I told you the story about, she's online all day long, and that's her job. So she tends to be probably more open and more prolific on the internet than some of you and I in this room. So her definition of privacy and mine are different. You're not going to see the videos of my kids in the womb on the internet. I'm not a mommy blogger. That's not what I do. But that doesn't mean my definition is wrong or hers is either. Privacy is critically important to liberty and democracy. We were having a discussion, some of the students and I, at lunch today. And I used the example, so I'm going to repeat it for you guys, but I used the example. If you are a chemist or an engineer and you are inspired to create the next product that can actually spot and defuse a bomb without using a tactical team and bomb dogs, which means you're saving lives, and you sit down to do your research and you go to the internet, what are you going to type in that search engine? Are you going to be a little hesitant that if you type the wrong thing, someone might knock on your door? That stifles creativity and innovation. But on the flip side, all of us sitting here in this room, do you want us to stop the next potential domestic bomber? Yes, you do. That's that gray area. That's that area that we have to have a vigorous and open public debate about. I do not have the answers. All I can tell you is from my geek perspective, how that data is collected and how to protect that data and how to think differently about privacy. But that is an area to me that our country is so great at having that open debate about, and it's time. It's time to have that open debate. So that's on the business side. That is your action item. As a leader in the business community, I want you to go back and say all technology is hackable. So I want us to talk about how we segment our data. How long do we keep it? Why do we collect it to begin with? And if you're storing Social Security numbers, why? Are you the Social Security Administration? If you're not, please stop doing that. Look at and contact some of the industries who have figured out a way around that. The financial services industry, in certain parts of the bank, we didn't store the Social Security number in our systems. We created unique identifiers that we figured out it was you through your Social Security number, through your relationship, and then we created a unique identifier and threw that away. So ask the tough questions about data. Make sure you don't have grandma's attic with your customer data. Have that digital shredding strategy and visualize the file cabinets taking over where people sit. And think differently. The other piece I would encourage you to do is to lead the way on privacy policies. So if you need to collect data in the business community, which you do to be able to provide good services, be fully transparent. I often say privacy policies because by the time the lawyers get done with them, and lawyers can be our friends too, my co-author is a lawyer. So the problem is the privacy policy, more often than not, in legal terms that most people don't understand, spells out the privacy you don't have. I challenge this group to help me reinvigorate privacy policies, write them in plain English, spell out clearly what you will and what you will not do with my data. I will not sell your data to third parties. I will sell your data to third parties to give you valued services. You may opt out by clicking here. I will, and you have to like it or lump it. Whatever it needs to be, you need to be more transparent. And if you lead the way on thinking differently about data and thinking differently about privacy and empowering the people that do business with you to take control of their own privacy, we're going to be safer for it. Now, consumers, I often get asked by consumers, so what can I do as a person? I can't control if the government collects my data other than saying I don't like it. I can't control that my data gets sold to third parties, and I'm connected on Facebook to my family, and I know I have no privacy there. I mean, so some people just sort of resign themselves to privacy is dead. And I hope that everyone walking out of here today says privacy is not dead, because if you say privacy is dead, then liberty is dead. So privacy is not dead. Have we given it up through finger swipes and mouse clicks over time? Yes, we have given some of it up. But is the convenience worth it? And I would say in many cases, the convenience is worth it. How many of you still use paper maps in your car? It's okay. I think it's cool. And sometimes, how many people have you heard following Google Maps have driven into a pond, right? So there is something to be said about the paper maps. But what you have now with the internet is you can find out where you're going, and if you can't, you can contact somebody from your car. No longer do you have to go to the payphone and call somebody because you've got access to the internet. Now, on the consumer side, I want you to think differently about this because you can take control. And the first thing, and we talked about this at the lunch, is a lot of people hand out their email address. What's your email address? Here, let me send you a coupon. Your doctor asked for it. Your bank asked for it. Let's go back to Target. What else was taken besides the credit card and debit card? The email address. When they got into Sony and they hacked Sony, God bless Sony, that was terrible. What did they do with emails? They took their emails, right? They took their email addresses. What's the first thing that started happening after the Anthem breach was known about? Were people getting fake emails from Anthem asking them to sign up for identity theft? So your email is almost the replacement these days in some regards for your Social Security number. So what you can do is you can have a different email address for the different parts of your life. So I have a throwaway email that It's not the one I'll give to you if you ask me for it today. But I have a throwaway email that when people say I want to send you a coupon, or I need to send you this, or I need to send you that, that's the email they get. So that's one category of my life. I have an email with our bank accounts that no one else has but the bank accounts. I have a different one with my kids' school. And that sounds unmanageable, but you can still send them all to one, you can forward them all to one central account to be able to manage them one place. But when I notice odd traffic happening on one of those email addresses, now I can replace that email address for that firewalled off part of my life, and I can manage that relationship. Is that email address still hackable? Sure. But it's a way to keep the bad guys from getting to all the treasure in one fell swoop. Now, the second thing is take advantage of two-factor authentication. That's that second step process. So where it says you can type in your cell phone number, we'll send you a code to know it's you. That is another great way to do that. A third, in protecting your privacy, and I know you're going to hate me for saying this, so please don't hate me too much. Read the privacy policies, and if you don't like it, don't use it. There's a great project called the catsme.ca website, CATSMI, and it's a Canadian nonprofit group, and they've actually gone through all the popular social media platforms, and they've spelled out in plain English what their privacy policies mean and don't mean. So if you have millennials in your life that you've thrown up your hands and you just can't talk to them anymore, great site to send them to help them understand sort of the do's and don'ts of privacy in sort of the digital age. And then the last thing that I would recommend that you think about is really having an open dialogue with your local and your federal officials. Let them know your concerns, whether it's your perception or your knowledge from reading the news around government collection of information, whether it's businesses and your concerns over businesses that have been breached that have your data. Ask questions. You know, and I mentioned this during the lunch, when somebody asks you for an eye scan or your handprint or your vein scan, or they ask you for your social security number, say, I'm not comfortable giving that to you. Is there an alternative? More often than not, they'll say, sure, I'll take your driver's license. Can you get a new driver's license if someone fabricates yours? You betcha. Can you get a new hand? I kind of don't want to. Can you get a new social security number? It's awfully darn hard. So ask questions. Don't be afraid to push back. If you do not take control of your own privacy, nobody else is going to do it for you. So those are my kind of key opening remarks and comments, and I think we've got time for Q&A, so I'd like to turn it over and let's have some great Q&A.
Theresa, thank you very much, and let's throw it open to questions. We have one right back here. Let's wait for the microphone. Ada, here, the microphone's coming right at you.
Thanks for being here. My question is, those companies that use our data, personal companies that use the data to monetize it without us getting anything from that, how do we deal with that?
That you bring up a great point, the whole kind of third-party marketing type of thing. So, you know, this is something that's evolved over time, the third-party marketing and reselling of data, and there's good that comes out of it. I mean, in banking, we used it to try and anticipate your next need and to sell you value-added services. But there is a concept of having to pay us a little bit for selling our data. I don't know if we'll get to that concept, but that's where, in my mind, that privacy policy is so critical, because oftentimes you don't realize it's sort of third degree of separation away from you when your data gets sold down the line. So you have a relationship, let's say it's your bank or your insurance company, and then they pass the information on as part of their operations, and they've got an agreement with somebody else who passes your information on. And that's where that asking a lot of questions and understanding where that data goes and how it goes. So for example, and this gets back to my challenge to the business community, segment your data. So if I do a transaction with you and you need to pass along my demographics, don't tie it to me with my zip code, because MIT and Carnegie Mellon have shown if I have just a few pieces of information, even if it's anonymized within a zip code, I can actually pinpoint it within some level of certainty between you and 4 other people in your zip code. Hello. So that's where we have to ask questions, read those privacy policies, and again, have that open dialogue, and vote with your feet. If you don't get a warm and fuzzy answer, that's what competition's all about. Deal with somebody else.
Steve, we've got a question in the back row back there.
Thinking about Eric Snowden, instead of doing what he did, can you tell us specific actions he might have taken to generate responsible discussion about the data collection he was concerned about?
Yeah, so on the Mr. Snowden case, I don't have like firsthand knowledge of that case, but I have a clearance, and so I take an oath every year about that clearance and what I know about and what goes to the grave, et cetera. And I remember, so this is kind of a personal story, when it first came out, and I thought, oh my gosh, why didn't he use the whistleblower program? And so the question myself and other professionals have asked ourselves is there something not working with the whistleblower program? And we don't know his full story yet, even though that documentary came out and won an award. That documentary started off once he decided he was not using the whistleblower program. So we don't really know, did he go through that program and decide he wasn't getting results and get out? And so the question, I think, for the federal government and for people like myself is, if the whistleblower program is not working, how do we fix it? I was asked a great question at lunch, which was on data collection, whether it's programs like PRISM or other programs. Do I believe with the right congressional oversight that those can work and we can have that balance, find the balance that's right for America on security and privacy? And I thought it was such a deep and thoughtful question from Steve, because that's what our 3 branches of government are all about, is making sure no one branch gets out of check. And I believe people are trying to do the right thing. They've got good interests at heart, and sometimes things get out of check, and that's what our 3 branches are about. So if anything out of the Snowden revelations, a couple personal reflections for me is, are there things amiss with the whistleblower program that those of us that are in the community need to ask questions and make sure that's working? And then the second is a dialogue like this, where we talk about privacy and business and government and try to find what the new normal is for this day and age. And then the third thing is we have to hold the 3 branches of government accountable for protecting the Constitution. And the Founding Fathers, the Constitution has stood the test of time, and the digital age is not going to burn the Constitution. I think the Constitution will be better for it, but we have to figure out that right dialogue around that. So I don't have an easy answer for your question, but it's a good one, and my answer back is, clearly, if he used the system, then the system was broken and needs to be fixed. And the other piece is we need to hold our 3 branches of government accountable for the amazing power and positive things that this information can do, while not trampling on our individual rights to freedom.
Yes, sir, we have a question right here. Wait, the microphone's coming right at you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. My son has tried to talk me into use an ID management software program for all the websites I access. I'm not very good at that. He is. He has a management of all of his websites, that every time he accesses a website, it generates some kind of a protection code. What do you think about? There are only, I think he said, 2 or 3 firms that do that. Yeah. Is it valuable?
They can be very valuable. So I was very resistant to sort of those password generators and the password vaults for years. And what I realized, because our customers kept asking us at the firm over and over again, I can't remember 100 passwords, and And, I would give them the tricks of the trade. You do a sentence, and then you take the first letter, and then they didn't hear any other instructions after that. Like their eyes glazed over, like, yeah, right, you're a geek. Of course that works for you. That does not work for me. And so we try to, we call it eating the dog food. So we tried to eat the dog food on that. And we have found that some of those password vaults are really good products built by, really good, smart people. Are they hackable? Absolutely. And so one of the extra layers of protection I recommend if you decide you're going to do a password vault is to also add a second piece, which is like a piece of hardware that you can't open the vault with just your password, that you have to have a piece of hardware. And I'm not endorsing products, so please, we don't sell products, but so for example, the one that we use as a company that we like is we use the YubiKey, and if anybody wants to see it, I have mine in the other room, and it's a physical thing that I put in, and it's got a unique RFID, and you press your thumb and it feeds it, and then you press in the complicated 16-digit to 24-digit password that you memorize, or you can lock it up or whatever, and then that's the only way you can get into the vault. And so if you're going to go the vault route, please don't, have a password 12345 for the password vault, because then you're going to have a problem. And do your homework. Make sure you go with a reputable company. And if it's free, you have to ask yourself why. I would go for the paid-for vault products, because then you will actually get something called support and service. I know that's a novel concept to be able to email or chat or call someone and get service, but it's really helpful.
Right here, we have a question.
My name is Rashida Parks from ULR. My question is, the use of big data and automated processes allowed Target to predict that a 16-year-old was pregnant before her parents did, unfortunately. While big data allowed you to be here on time, we're thankful for that, it is also hindering our privacy. Now, my question is not from an individual perspective, but rather organizational perspective. What can organizations do from technology, strategy, or policies to protect our privacy, whether it's consumer, patient, or other? Thank you.
Yeah, and you're right, and this is where it gets interesting, because the definition of privacy is difficult to define. So one person who gets their Target coupons that are paper towels just before they need to buy them, as a mother of 3 of kids who play sports, I really appreciate those targeted coupons, right? It's like, wow, the whole book is something I can use. And then you go from the cool to creepy immediately. Like, okay, wait a minute. They know exactly when I need to buy paper towels and dishwash soap, et cetera, and then they change each month which coupons I'm getting. And we can make fun of that because it's retail. But that applied in other companies could be difficult. So for example, what if the insurance companies were able to leverage your social media posts, and even though you say you're not a drinker and smoker, all of your pictures that have facial recognition, there tend to be drinks at the table. Now maybe they're all virgin cocktails, but maybe they're not, right? And so what happens when your premiums start inching up because they say, well, she's a liar, at least according to Facebook. So that's where you've got to figure out sort of that happy balance. And like I said earlier, just because you can as a company with technology doesn't mean you should. And that's where the company has to have a conscious strategy and roadmap around big data and say, where do we cross the line from cool to creepy? Where do we cross the line from caring about our customer and giving them just-in-time things that they need, and crossing the line and invading their privacy? I'll give you an example. We have a digital protection service that we do for high-profile individuals, and it's just something that's kind of come up over time. It's not our core business, but we ended up working with companies, and then the CEO and the board would say, I need some help protecting myself and protecting my family. And in one example, in doing that circle of protection, we figured out that for one of the executives that his sweet daughter really wasn't always going home to her apartment. She pretty much had moved in with the boyfriend, and that's what we were able to find in doing our digital protection service. And we're looking at the report, and I'm looking at it, and I said, guys, just because we know this doesn't mean it has to go in the report. This is best left for daddy and daughter to have that conversation, and I don't see how the fact that she's always over there changes her security and his security, and he's the ultimate client. So that's a tough one-on-one decision we had to make. But in the bigger macro view for businesses, you have to be thinking at that level. And that, when do you cross that line? And because we have not kept up, we have not had that open dialogue, I think businesses are struggling to find that right line. So they have to make money, and they have to make revenue, and they want to show they know you, but they're not sure where that line has to stop. That's a tough one.
Jerry?
Thanks. I'm Jerry Jones. I happen to be the Chief Ethics and Legal Officer at a big data company, Axiom, and I'm really glad you're here. You know, one of the things that we always struggle with is computers are pretty dumb, and they don't really understand context. In a field such as privacy, or when you're dealing with facts about an individual, things may be relevant at one point in time and totally irrelevant at another. Your instance on the marketing thing. If I get an ad for a free cold beer on a Friday afternoon, I'm pretty excited about that. If I get the ad on a Monday morning, I'm not very excited about that. And as business is trying to deal with these massive amounts of information, we're still dealing with a dumb machine that is driven by rules. One of the things that we have tried to do at Axiom is to elevate the conversation from adherence to the law to adherence to an ethical framework. Because as you point out, the law is totally incapable of keeping up with the rapid movement of technology, and has been so since the advent of the pencil, if you think about it. So we are struggling to determine what is the proper ethical framework on the use of data, as opposed to looking at the myriad of laws. Should data be a fundamental right? The White House came out with a privacy bill of rights. In Europe, quote, privacy is a fundamental human right. In our country, it is not. There are competitive advantages to the U.S.'s economy vis-a-vis the European economy as a result of that. So this is a field that I think is very, very important that we have these type of discussions, because it's about us, it's about our identity as individuals, but there aren't a whole lot of real easy answers when you're trying to deal with scale. And big data, at its heart, is simply trying to represent digitally what the real world tells us anyway. I'll put a question mark at the end of all that.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right, and that is the thing, is as we became less connected, customers and organizations and coworkers to each other, and technology replaced that facial expression. I mean, think how much differently this presentation would be if I was Skyping into you. So you could see my face, and maybe I would see you all as like little tiny heads on a screen. And think about the difference. I wouldn't see body language. I wouldn't see somebody puzzled, somebody who disagreed with me, which I welcome, and somebody who agreed with me. I wouldn't see all of that while I'm talking to you. And so I think you're right that we're trying to replace with big data what, as we became a more efficient, innovative, and creative economy, where we lost touch with each other in that face-to-face realm. And you're right, technology is only as smart as the programming that people put into it. But technology still not, I mean, in Japan, they're trying to do the nurses that take care of you, but technology to this point, other than Hero 6 in the movies, has a hard time really understanding your feelings. Question?
Yeah, Alex Lannis, I'm a Clinton School student, I met you earlier. So to what extent does government prevent the implementation of privacy within businesses like Google and Apple that are having troubles these days with privacy because of government wanting to be able to see what's going on?
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, and that is, so when we think about 911. One of the first questions, after the horror had set in, people asked was, how come we didn't know? How come we couldn't prevent it? And the same thing happens every time there's a tragedy, whether it's here or whether it's in another country. And the first question everybody asks is, what did we know? Why couldn't we prevent that? And that's a good human reaction to have, because nobody wants to see another human suffering. Nobody wants to see another person die at the hands of another person. And yet, if we go too far down the path of trying to predict and monitor and look, you don't want to end up walking around like Tom Cruise in Minority Report. So again, we're at this critical juncture where the government, who has an accountability and responsibility not only to protect our freedoms and our liberties, but in doing so protecting us as people and protecting our shores. And so they're looking for what's the best way to do that. And looking at communications seems like a way to do that. But yet on the flip side, we're saying, well, wait a second. We already had laws that governed our home phones. You had to follow a certain protocol for listening in on someone's home phone conversation, for intercepting their mail, for going to their workplace, for knocking on the door and searching their home or searching their car. And in the digital world, it's still really gray. And so we have to have this dialogue because we're seeing the impact that's going to have a long-term impact for years to come. You have the right to be forgotten being, developed out of the EU, which sounds great on paper, not so easy to implement. But you also have where people have the perception of, well, I'm not going to use the Google Cloud or Amazon Cloud because they're American companies, and I don't want the American government spying on me. So if I use a cloud that's over here, that's developed by Germans or developed by this, now it's almost like we're going the opposite way from global trade to protectionism around digital. And if we do that, we're going to lose out on a lot of creativity and innovation that needs to happen to continue to improve each country and to continue to improve our lives as citizens of our own countries. And so the government, I think, has a responsibility to sit down with the tech companies and us and have that dialogue around what's the line. And I think we're all really uncomfortable right now having that dialogue and understanding where to draw the line. And guess what? That line is going to change over time as technology continues to change and morph and be more embedded in our lives and more helpful to our lives. So you bring up a question that I don't have a really ready pat answer for, but it's a great question because it's that dialogue that we have to have. And you've heard Silicon Valley say we felt like we had no other choice. We had to build the back door. So if you agree with that policy, let's just say for a moment you did agree with that policy. Just understand, when you leave a door open for good guys, it's a door open for bad guys. And so that's where we have to be careful and have the right protocols and procedures, not just from the technology standpoint and the court standpoint and our 3 branches of government standpoint, but really thinking again, if we know all technology is hackable, what data do we collect? How long do we keep it? And what is our responsibility to protect it and know that it's been compromised?